Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's event, Taiwan Relations at 40, the Taiwan Relations Act at 45 and counting. My name's Janet Steele, and I'm the interim director of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies and a professor of journalism here at the School of Media and Public Affairs. I think as most of you know, the Sigur Center is the only center of its type in the Washington, D.C. area, and we host many events about Taiwan, China, and other parts of Asia. The purpose of our center is to improve the quality of research and education about Asia and to promote greater dialogue between the policy community, the academic community, the public, and students. We have over 60 faculty who focus on Asia. Along with the GW Institute for Korean Studies, GWIX, the Sigur Center has been named as the only national resource center for Asia, East Asia in the Washington, D.C. area. And the NRC designation enhances our ability to engage the broader community on regional and global issues of importance. So our active and vibrant Taiwan program, the largest among DC universities, is an important part of the National Resource Center. So we're very, very happy to be hosting today's program, which is part of our Taiwan event series. Today we have three very distinguished speakers. And they're going to, an equally distinguished moderator, Professor Deepa Olapalli, and they're going to focus on the topic of taking stock of the Taiwan Relations Act. And they'll be asking questions like, how has its meaning and interpretation changed over time? What do the US executive and congressional positions on the act look like? And to what extent does the Tah-ray come into play in cross-strait relations? And by the way, there's a wonderful photo exhibition downstairs on the second floor in the atrium. You're all welcome to go and have a look at that. Our friends at TECRO have brought over some beautiful photos, and it's also great. You can see young Joe Biden, and it's quite an impressive exhibition. And be sure to look for Ronald Reagan's little private note he wrote on one of the important State Department documents. It's quite a treat. But first, before the program and before you all go and look at the exhibition, I'm delighted to welcome Taiwan's representative to the US, Ambassador Alexander Tah-ray, who will deliver some opening remarks. Wait, I have to give you your bio. Ambassador Yu has been the representative for the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the United States since December of 2023. He has previously served as the representative to the European Union, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Director General of the Department of Latin America and Caribbean Affairs, as well as the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the Republic of Paraguay. He has a BA in Political Science and Modern Languages, as well as an MA in Spanish Literature from Texas A&M University. He's attended executive programs at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and the London School of Economics. Ambassador Yu, we're so happy and so honored to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Janet. Now I know how George Washington University students go through, use this liquid death to go through your finals. I wish I had this during my finals at Texas A&M. But a pleasure to be at the Sigur Center, and thank you, Janet, for the kind introduction, and to Deepa for having nice talks just now during lunch. I had an opportunity to be a fellow at Brookings in 2010. Took a little time out at my career in foreign ministry, and had a wonderful time in DC because all these events such as this open your minds and see the U.S. officials and academics and interact with each other, and I learned a lot, not only doing the research work at Brookings, but also attending these events. And I live right here by the this apartment complex that's next to George Washington University. So I walk around this quite a lot. So I have very fond memories of university. But we're commemorating 45 years of Taiwan Relations Act. And as Jana mentioned, there's a picture exhibition in the second floor on and about Taiwan Relations Act, the documents and some historic moments that relates to the Taiwan Relations Act. But 1979, when it was enacted, it was actually dark times for Taiwan. You know, in 1979 is when the United States ended diplomatic relations with the Republic of China. And at that point in time, before that, in 1971, we were forced to leave the United Nations, and many countries after that broke relations with Taiwan, with the Republic of China. So when 1979 came and the United States broke relations, for many people in Taiwan, the prospects, the future prospects looked very dim. It was the end of the world for many of us. But Congress took up and passed this Taiwan Relations Act, and then obviously with later on with the 6 assurances from the U.S. administration, this has been the bedrock of US-Taiwan relations, absent of diplomatic relations, but as if we had, you know, relations, very substantive relations. So we have thrived in since 1979, you know, in our terms of security, defense, education, technology, trade, etc. You name it. Just by the what's been happening lately here in DC, the supplemental bill to enforce Indo-Pacific defense, including Taiwan, and the 21st Century Trade Initiative, the talks that just was held in Taipei, and other issues that's going on here in DC, and it shows the exemplary and solid relations that we're promoting between our two sides. But also the TRA was fundamental for Taiwan, as I mentioned. 1979, future looked bleak for Taiwan, but the TRA allowed some peace and stability in the region, in Taiwan Straits. And since then, Taiwan, you know, we were able to develop our economy and also have this political transformation into becoming what we are today, a fully fledgling, functioning democracy. We just elected our 8th, directly voted and elected our 8th president by direct vote. And you know, nowadays, people talk about TSMC. You know, sometimes I have to explain to people in the audience that I really don't represent TSMC. I represent Taiwan, because people just talk about TSMC all the time. But all this economic achievement, you know, what Taiwan is, your 8th largest trading partner. We do more trade with you than what you do trade with India, with Brazil, with the Netherlands, with Italy, with France, etc. So, you know, we are no small feat. You know, we're a small island, but economic wise, we are a powerhouse. But directly or indirectly, TRA allowed us, gave us a space to do that, and that is very relevant for us. So today we have 3 distinguished scholars, Ryan, Vincent, and Raymond, who will give us a good outlook on different angles to look at TRA. I'm very happy to be here, and you know, I want to listen to what you have to offer about from your perspective on the TRA's developments. But thank you very much for being here. I'm very happy to be here, and well, looking forward to it. Thank you very much. Yeah.
We invite panelists now to come on up here. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm Deepa Olapalli, the Associate Director of the Sigur Center. And Ambassador, thank you. I could actually have you as the 4th panelist, but I will let you listen this time. But thank you for those opening remarks that really set the stage for what is, in some sense, a very remarkable act that came into being at a critical moment. And for the panel that we have assembled here is going to be taking up the questions that Janet pointed out. You know, how has the TRA's meaning and interpretation changed over time? It's been a while. It's been since 1979. And because this was a act that was initiated by Congress, how has that shaped it, and what's the situation with the executive now? And of course, finally, something that's on a lot of our minds, how does it all play out in trust trade relations? So to help do that, I'm going to introduce everybody at once. And then they'll each have about, let's say 10 minutes perhaps, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So we will begin by taking a look back at the TRA and its evolution. And to help us do that is Dr. Vincent Wang, who is a highly accomplished scholar administrator. Usually you don't say that in the same breath, but he is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and a well-known professor of political science. He has written extensively on East Asia, Taiwan, political economy. He has a BA from National Taiwan University. I'm not going to give very long intros because you can read their distinguished biographies online that we have provided. Following Vincent, we will then turn to Ryan Haas, yes, who will talk about the congressional executive positions on this as current day. How's it going these days? Again, Ryan is a combination of analyst and a previous government official, very senior, distinguished service. He is coming from Brookings. He's a chair in Taiwan studies at Brookings. And he has also, before that, Ryan served as a director for China, Taiwan, Mongolia at the NSC, and really a critical role in US policy. And before that, he was a foreign service officer. I do want to just point one highlight because I think that speaks volumes. When he was a foreign service officer in Beijing, he earned the State Department Director General's Award for Impact and Originality in Reporting, an award that's given annually to the officer whose reporting has had the greatest impact on the foundation of US foreign policy. That's a big ask for anybody. So it's quite remarkable. I had to say that. Okay, and to round off something, as I said, that we're all thinking about a bit is on the TRA and its role in cross-strait relations with Dr. Raymond Kuo. Raymond is coming from RAND Corporation, which is one of the most influential think tanks in the country on foreign policy. He is the inaugural director of RAND Corporation's Taiwan Policy Initiative. So we'll be watching you, Raymond. He has published extensively, and he has a PhD from Princeton University. So with that, I will invite Vincent, and you can either stay there or stand up, whatever your choice. Okay.
Thank you. I think I will speak from here. Is that okay?
That's fine. Is that
Good afternoon. Thank you, Deepa and George Washington University for inviting me to participate in this very important panel. It's also good to shift to a scholarly hat rather than administrative hat. But anyway, when Ambassador, you earlier mentioned that 45 years ago in 1979, I entered college in the fall of 1978. So the first December, I went to, at that time, the only international airport in Taiwan, Songshan Airport. The US government sent Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher to Taiwan to discuss the relations after President Jimmy Carter had announced that as of January 1st, 1979, the US would terminate diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, abrogate the Mutual Defense Treaty, and take 1 year to withdraw the military force from Taiwan. So indeed, many people felt like what Ambassador mentioned, that there was a very dark time for us, and especially before the Taiwan Relations Act were enacted. At that time, Taiwan was only beginning to become what later known as the little tiger, one of the little tigers. The per capita income was less than $2,000 US. Taiwan was still under authoritarian rule, that the incipient democracy movement was really just incipient. And that, as Ambassador Yu also mentioned, that Taiwan suffered a series of diplomatic setbacks, culminating in the US derecognition. So Congress came to the rescue, and I think at that time, Congress was asked to do to take up a very pragmatic but also immediate task, which is how do you maintain and arguably enhance relations with an entity you no longer recognize to maintain the substantive relationship. And I will say that the origin was very pragmatic, very humble. And today we are celebrating the 45th anniversary, probably many more years. I think even a lot of framers at that time did not anticipate that this single piece of legislature could last this long and seem to go so well. I credit this sort of longevity or enduring nature of TRA to three factors. One is that, as I mentioned earlier, it was to deal with a pragmatic problem, it's actually a diplomatic conundrum. So the TRA consequently was very flexible. So it's, actually what matters more is how the act was interpreted and implemented rather than stipulated. And then, my colleagues, Ryan and Raymond, I mean, especially Ryan has worked in the US government. He will provide a sort of an inside view. I'm a scholar, so I'll provide an outside view. And I also think that a second reason why the TRA has been successful, and this was true at that time, but probably less true today, is at that time, this piece of act was possible because of a very rare congressional legislative equilibrium, because Congress was not happy with the way President Jimmy Carter consummated the act, and the Taiwan Enabling Act presented by the administration was woefully inadequate. So Congress came to work, and they especially beef up the security premise. So this point is often overlooked because over the years, there have been efforts to either strengthen or to weaken the TRA. So strengthen is understandable, weaken because there are always some people in the United States who view the US-Taiwan relations as a sort of a companion or a part of the larger relations of US-China relations. And remember that 1979 was during the Cold War. The United States was interested in seeking rapprochement and normalization relations with the PRC. So the three conditions I just mentioned were all the terms set down by PRC. So the US, accepted those three terms. And Congress was not happy with the way President Carter did this and asserted itself. I think most people agree that foreign policy is primarily executive purview, but Congress has shown an unusual interest and commitment toward Taiwan. And in fact, very few in the bilateral relations with US relations with other countries, there are very few examples such as US-Taiwan relations. And of course, it's actually not realistic to expect such complex relationship can be managed by a single piece of legislation. But for the most part, I would say, it's pretty remarkable. And finally, I think a feature for the durability of TRA is that conceptually, I think that TRA is actually a transitory arrangement. It's not meant for forever, although because just to follow my train of thought for the moment, that if the foreign policy is primarily the president's prerogative, if Taiwan one day should declare de jure independence, there's nothing to prevent the US president to formally recognize that and establish diplomatic relations. On the other hand, if the people of Taiwan willingly to unify with mainland China, there's nothing in the TRA to stop that either. So in other words, the US government has been very judiciously silent on the outcome, but emphasize on the process, that the process must be very peaceful, okay? And this is actually because It's transitory. So they actually dovetail very well with the US government's persistence on the so-called status quo. The status quo, we know that the status quo is not static, but on the other hand, while the US try to maintain formal relations with the PRC, maintain substantive relations with Taiwan, and this status quo can be accommodated in the TRA. So these three reasons, I think, are key for the success of the TRA. Now, a TRA, we know that TRA is one of the pillars, the main pillars of US relations with Taiwan. The others are the three communiques between the US and the PRC, and more recently, the 6 assurances issued by President Reagan. And actually downstairs on the second floor, you can see a photograph of that original document. But I think that it's pretty ingenious in the sense that every time when US diplomats talk with the Chinese diplomats, they of course emphasize the salience of the 3 communiques. To them, these are like international treaties, but the US diplomats are able to say that our relations are governed by a domestic law, which is Taiwan Relations Act. It's actually highest law in the land. So this creates some, what the scholar Jacques Delio called acoustic separation. So basically playing a 2-level game. The diplomats play a game at the diplomatic level, but then they can carry out all the substantive relations. For example, Article number 4 of the TRA said whenever the laws of the US apply, it applies to Taiwan. And this is why Taiwan became the 37th partner to get the visa waiver program. If you go to the State Department website, it actually has a footnote about how they can do this because it's TRA. Now about Deepa asked me to say a few words about the change of interpretation of TRA over time. And of course, as I said, I'm looking from outside. The way I see it is that, yes, the TRA has been very endurable and very successful. However, it is not static. I said it dovetails very well with the status quo, but the status quo is not static. So 1979 is not the same as 2024. So obviously, I also said earlier that it's pretty remarkable that this piece of legislation can guide the bilateral relationship for so long, but it is not perfect. So I'm going to talk about sort of this change a little bit. The first question has always been, is the TRA a floor or a ceiling? The concept of a floor is that, it is a basic platform and it provides some basic, of course, in this regard, we can look at all these objective indicators and say, I said earlier, 1979, Taiwan's economy was small, but today, as Ambassador Yu just mentioned, Taiwan is actually hovering between the 8th or the 10th largest trading partner of the United States. And Taiwan is one of the 20th largest economies in the world. So Taiwan Relations Act probably played a role to enable this relationship. But of course, there are some other drawbacks. For example, the relationship could be stronger if there had been a free trade agreement or say a bilateral investment agreement or a taxation agreement so that to avoid double taxation and so on. So there's room to grow. In terms of security, I think that was the biggest contribution of TRA over the Taiwan Enabling Act. The TRA, a lot of scholars debate whether the TRA is actually can substitute the former Mutual Defense Treaty. In one view, it is weaker than the Mutual Defense Treaty, although President Biden, I forgot which year, but when he was asked a question about Article number 5 of the NATO, which is the concept of collective self-defense, attack on one is attack of all. And he said that that applies to NATO. It also applies to Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. This is actually the first time I heard a US president openly said that the concept of Article number 5 apply to an entity it no longer recognized or has a mutual defense treaty. So the TRA's language, if you look at the language, it doesn't guarantee the US will defend Taiwan in case of a attack. But President Biden has said on 4 times that if it's an unprovoked attack, the US will defend Taiwan. We made a sacred commitment, something of that sort. But every time his aides are trying to walk him back. But I think it's hard to conclude that, that we have some moments 4 times. So I think that he was probably speaking his mind. And then there's one other aspect of the TRA's security provision, which has not received a lot of attention, which TRA mandate the US maintain the capacity to resist the use of force and other forms of intimidation against Taiwan. So this means that the US will beef up its capabilities in the Indo-Pacific in case this happens. And I think that we can agree that the US is trying to do this, but it has not been there. So to me, TRA is only a floor, not a ceiling, because if we say it's a ceiling, then the relationship has its limits, I said earlier that over the years, many people have tried to change the TRA either more pro-Taiwan or less pro-Taiwan, but have failed. But the exception was since 2016, there have been a series of pro-Taiwan legislations such as Taiwan Travel Act, Taipei Act, and so on. These, I don't think they fundamentally alter the TRA basic framework, but they also exist in an environment that the administration is more likely to comply rather than, say, previously, when they like to see the Congress as interfering in the executive realm. So I will say that there exists a very high degree of consensus between the executive branch and the legislative branch. The last point I want to make is that perhaps this is one area that can receive more attention. TRA also requires the president, the executive branch, to frequently consultation with Congress and notify Congress if there's something serious happening. As far as I can tell, at least in the public, everybody remember in 1996, there was the 3rd Taiwan Strait crisis. Eventually, President Clinton dispatched 2 aircraft carrier groups to the waters of Taiwan to diffuse the tension. But I'm not sure whether President Clinton actually, through constitutional measures, informed the Congress about this. And I think this is actually one area that needs to be strengthened because Taiwan Relations Act is not very clear about the threshold beyond which the executive branch needs to notify Congress. And we know that recently, the greatest challenge and most nettlesome challenge is China's increased use of the so-called gray zone conflict tactic. These are not necessarily military actions, but they can lead to actions. It's also difficult to distinguish between exercise and the kinetic action. So I think I will pause here to say that the Taiwan Relations Act has been very successful. Its interpretation has varied over time, but it needs an update. And I think the areas that have not received attention are maybe the efforts of the US to strengthen Taiwan's economic resilience and also to deal with gray zone tactics.
Thank you, Vincent, for that masterclass on the TRA. You've mentioned Congress and executive as well as gray zone, which our last speaker was touched on. But now let me turn it over to perhaps an insider view, since having been in the hot seat.
Well, Deepa, thank you for this opportunity to be with you all for this event, and Janet as well. Ambassador, we're honored by your presence with us. but we are also honored by the presence of our students who are here during finals week. That's an extraordinary effort on your part. As Deepa mentioned, my job is to try to analyze US congressional and executive branch views of the Taiwan Relations Act after 45 years. I'm going to try to be deliberately efficient in doing so because I think the real value of our time will be the conversation that we have amongst us, but I will try to touch on 4 points. These insights or observations have been made easier by the fact that we have had 2 congressional hearings in the past week on this very question that involve Ambassador Assistant Secretary Dan Crittenbrink and members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So drawing from those hearings, I would make 4 observations. The first is that I think that there is, as Dr. Wang was talking about a moment ago, broad recognition in Washington that the Taiwan Relations Act has been enormously successful. It has been an extraordinary piece of legislation. It has been credited by the Biden administration with giving the United States government the tools it needs to pursue our overall objective of preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. It has been applauded by members of Congress, both Democrat and Republican, which is fairly rare in these current moments. And I think any cursory review of history of the past 45 years would validate this applause. As Ambassador mentioned, in 1979, the situation was pretty dire. Taiwan was under martial law. Trade between the United States and Taiwan was around $9 billion. Its future fate was uncertain. And the US-Taiwan Relations Act was, or the United States-Taiwan relationship was reeling. And here we are, 45 years later, the relationship between the United States and Taiwan is flourishing. There's over $128 billion in two-way trade between the United States and Taiwan. The United States and Taiwan coordinate on just about every issue in the human condition that occurs around the world on any given day. And the relationship is anchored in both Washington and Taipei in broad bipartisan support. So I think that, you know, as much as we observe the relationship and the Taiwan Relations Act itself, we ought to take a minute to reflect upon the success that it has delivered. The success, I think, and this is my second point, is a function of the fact that the Taiwan Relations Act is very flexible. The framers of the act recognize that it is not America's role to resolve cross-strait differences. Neither side of the Taiwan Strait would welcome the United States if it attempted to mediate any such efforts. And the act is broad enough, flexible enough, capacious enough to allow us to adjust our approach as circumstances change, all while remaining anchored to an understanding of our long-term interests, which are enumerated in the Taiwan Relations Act, but are basically to preserve peace and stability and to insist that any resolution of cross-strait differences be resolved peacefully in a manner that reflects the will of the people, I would say, in Taiwan. So the Taiwan Relations Act has given members of the executive branch decision space to respond to shifting dynamics in ways that are anchored in these core objectives. That's the second observation. The third observation is that we should acknowledge that some members of Congress have expressed uneasiness that China's threat to Taiwan is growing in ways that they find frustrating. I find it frustrating too, but I also have been around enough to know that this frustration is not a new feeling. The United States has experienced similar feelings of frustration during past periods of great power competition throughout our history. Salami slicing sucks. It is frustrating, but it is something that we have dealt with in the past, we will deal with in the future. Now, for some members of Congress, the proper response to the salami slicing is to try to brush Beijing back, to push them back by speaking with greater clarity about America's determination to defend Taiwan. And for some members of Congress, that means that the United States should be more explicit in saying that it would come to Taiwan's defense if it was ever attacked. To other members, I think it means that the United States should preemptively threaten, take specific actions against China if it were ever to seek to compel unification, such as destroying TSMC fabs or rescinding most favored nation trading status with China. And for others, I think the solution is just to put more military force, more hard power in China's path to prevent China from pursuing unification through force. I would say that the Biden administration has pushed back against this pressure to make major shifts in its longstanding approach to cross-strait issues. Their argument is that conflict is neither imminent nor inevitable, that the United States-Taiwan relationship is at an all-time high, and that the Taiwan Relations Act provides them with the tools that they need and the flexibility that they need to manage the moment. And this leads to the final point that I will close on, which is that the Biden administration believes that United States steadiness is a key ingredient for attracting greater global support for Taiwan's political system and its way of life. The more that the United States and its friends in Taiwan are seen as steady, principled, confident, the easier it is for other countries to feel comfortable walking alongside us, lending greater support for upholding peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. If, on the other hand, the United States is seen as taking actions that are interpreted as altering the status quo, it will raise cost and risk for other countries to feel comfortable working alongside us on issues related to Taiwan. And so this is an implicit rejection of the notion held by some that Taiwan is solely a military problem and that the solution to this problem is to just put greater hard power in China's path. So I will close where I started by applauding the architects of the Taiwan Relations Act. We are the beneficiaries today of their foresight and wisdom. I expect that we will continue to build upon the foundation that they have laid as we continue to adjust to the ebbs and flows that exist in the cross-strait relationship. My impression is that the Biden administration feels confident that the Taiwan Relations Act confers them with authorities that they need to continue deepening relations with Taiwan, protecting the peace, and supporting Taiwan's autonomy, its political system, and its way of life. And I hope they succeed in those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, for those really concise and insightful comments and the ringing endorsement of the framers of the TRA. All right. The gray zone tactics have come up. China has come up many times in this discussion. So now it's my pleasure to turn to Raymond Kuo, who's going to tell us about TRA, its impact or not on cross-strait. And I should mention in this context that in 2021, he published a book called Contests of Contests of Initiative, which focuses on China's maritime gray zone strategy. So
thank you all very much. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you all for having me here. I have the unenviable task of following up two great discussions here on these issues. So I'm going to do my best by just throwing out some things I was going to say. I think first off, I think thinking through what particularly Professor Wang said about the TRA, it's that when we think about the Taiwan Relations Act, it's very much, at least in my mind, a push by the legislative branch against the executive. And so when his discussion of is it a ceiling or is it a floor, it's very much a floor in my mind because of who the actor is. Foreign policy, the ability to set a positive agenda, is the purview of the executive branch when it comes to foreign policy, because they're the ones who have the initiative. They are the ones who have command the military. They can gather the kind of totality of national resources and put it towards particular foreign policy objectives. Congress, by contrast, gets to set the floor. It says, we are not going to let relations slip below this level. We have the ability to say no. That's essentially the power of the purse in a lot of cases. And so, we think about the initial Carter draft of what eventually became the Taiwan Relations Act, and it lacked most of what we consider to be the hallmarks of the TRA, arms sales and the U.S. interest in Taiwan's defense. This is rare, right? Congress really has only gotten involved in foreign policy in Taiwan, Israel, and Cuba. That's pretty much it. And I think this is indicative that support for Taiwan tends to be stronger in the legislative branch than the executive branch. And this lack of coordination between the legislature and the executive can cause problems. I mean, we just need to go back to 2022 and the Pelosi visit to Taiwan. I don't, however, think that means that Congress should butt out. There's questions about should we make the TRA stronger or should we modify it in some way? Ultimately, I think Congress needs to have a role in this, not simply because it is Congress, but also because when we think about US-Taiwan relations and US-China relations, these are no longer issues that can be settled amongst individual negotiators. The problems that we face in the US-China relationship, the opportunities that we face in the US-Taiwan relationship are ultimately society-to-society generated problems and opportunities, and if it's going to require solutions at that same level. And so I think the TRA can be a very good model for how we deliberate, debate, and develop these policies going forward, and combining the legislature with this representation of the public in the United States alongside the executive in the execution of that policy. I think one other thing comes out of the TRA as well, especially when you think about the Carter administration. They kind of put out that sort of cookie cutter draft of whatever it was. One of the issues is that Taiwan is kind of an afterthought in the broader US-China relations discussions. And I think part of that is, the kind of chauvinism isn't the right word, but the fact that hegemons and great powers can tend to ignore small states, and we can tend to ignore second and third order effects of our actions simply because we are powerful. I know Kissinger is lionized in DC. My wife is from Bangladesh, so absolutely not in my family. And he was great at this very short-sighted willingness to sacrifice the US's commanding position, moral position in a lot of cases, for his own personal and political gain. Funny, at least in my estimation, and I guess you can quote me on this, on the wrong side of every single major foreign policy issue in the last 30 years, or when he was around. And yet we look back now in the United States on the world that we've created, and we feign surprise that in a moment when we have relative decline in power, we want other countries to sign on to our rules and leadership, that they wonder whether or not we are actually following the rules that we set for ourselves. And so oftentimes the retort is that, well, both Professor Wang and Ryan,
Ryan.
or Mr. Haas?
No, Ryan. My name is Ryan.
And Ryan had mentioned the flexibility of the TRA, and I think that is true. I think it has been extremely flexible, and that is to its benefit. But the problem, at least in my mind, is that we cannot look at the TRA in isolation from the underlying political and military dynamics that support it. And this is really where I think a lot of the shifts in the US-China relation, this is where the TRA has that kind of impact. In the 70s, or I guess into the 80s, into the 90s, maybe even into the early 2000s, the United States had a preponderance of power in the cross-strait relation. Timothy Crawford wrote about this in his book in 2008. Pivotal deterrence: the US can swing its decisive power against whichever faction or whichever country happens to be causing problems at the moment. And that way it can dual deter. But that only works if the US has pivotal power, if it has the preponderance of power amongst the three states. And in this sort of situation, it makes a lot of sense to be flexible. Full credit to the TRA's authors. This is actually really, really good. You want to worry about entrapment. If you're strong enough to defeat either side has an incentive to try to pull you onto entrap you into a conflict that you don't actually want. Because you're so much stronger, and because the other two states, in this case, Taiwan and China, because they really can't shift the military balance all that much, well, they have to engage in symbolic or rhetorical issues, because that's really the only way they can advance their policy positions amongst this trilateral relationship. When that condition no longer holds, we should be asking ourselves, does that flexibility actually, does it work in the way it did in the past? And I've argued in a variety of pieces that the answer is no. And in fact, the flexibility that, say, Kissinger embodied, or that we tend to lionize in foreign policy, one, we don't do that with any other country in the world, really. And two, the utility of that flexibility has faded as the military balance in the cross-strait relations has shifted. And so I think Ryan's absolutely correct. We want to be, we, speaking as the United States here, want to be in a position where we can not just give other countries a reason to run away from China, but also give them a reason to run towards us. And that involves, taking the perspectives of smaller states in the region seriously, incorporating them into what John Eckenberry calls the liberal international order. We have rules, we have institutions, they serve a variety of different functions, and they actually enhance US power, and we should be using that and leveraging it. It means, however, that we do have to deeply listen to and respond to our partners and allies if we expect to have some sort of united response to on perhaps an issue by issue basis against whatever China happens to be doing. And it's where those principles really do matter, where you can say, we stand for this, we have embodied this in these rules, and we implement this through these institutions. We are not going to sell you out for some short-term gain. But instead, we have a confident vision of how the Indo-Pacific, I kind of hate that phrase, Asia-Pacific, how, and not just Asia-Pacific, but the entire global order should be structured, and we can actually back it up. And so there are a couple things I would say on top of that when we think about the TRA. And how much more time?
Take a few more minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, no problem. This is the last bits here. One of the issues with the TRA is that it only applies to the United States. I mean, understandably so, right? We're not executing US law internationally. But there is a sense in which we want to get more countries onto the kind of the framework that the TRA establishes. And to its credit, the Biden administration, I think, has done quite well here. It's created institutions within the Indo-Pacific in a way that I think it was T.J. Pemple in 2010, professor emeritus at Berkeley now, who said that Asia is really suffering from an organizational gap. Well, we're filling that gap, and in a way of bringing in these countries together under security cooperation. But that's not enough. Countries in the region are looking at us and saying, yeah, you talk about the principles. You maybe project confidence. You maybe want to attract the global support. But what is your ability to actually support us? And so I would propose two things if we want to continue down this path, which is perfectly debatable. First is our defense industrial base. Taiwan has $19 billion of US weapons they paid for, and we haven't produced them yet because our industrial base just is not there. If we were going to do this, we have to take it seriously. Secondly, outgoing Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong, when he talked about the TPP, he said, look, if you guys aren't going to sign this, you guys being the United States, well, if you can't do trade relations, how do we know that you're going to be able to do security relations? He says specifically, quote, it is your credibility that is on the line. And I think he's absolutely right. And so things like the 21st Century Trade Initiative, I think, are an excellent start, but we have to be bolder and have a greater vision of not just political, but also military and economic leadership in the region. Cool. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that forceful call for greater action. Let me, because we have such a full house today, I'm going to concede my time right now as moderator for a question and open it up to those who are here, especially any students who may have to run out after this. But please raise your hand and someone will come with a mic and identify yourself and what organization you're from. Right here in the front here, up here on the second row, on this side. Okay.
Hi, I'm Alan Jung, an undergraduate student at Georgetown from South Korea. Vice President Annette Lu of Taiwan, the hero of Taiwan's democratization, stated that there are 3 years of somber years in Taiwanese diplomacy history. One being 1971, when the year Taiwan was kicked out from the United Nations. The year 1979, the year US ended diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And the year 1992, the year South Korea ended the diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And at a public event at the National Assembly of South Korea, she urged the South Korean politicians to draft a South Korean version of the Taiwan Relations Act. So my question is, so South Korea and Taiwan do not particularly have really close relations as of now, but could South Korea and Taiwan have a rapprochement with their own version of TRA? And could Japan do the same thing? Thank you so much.
Okay, well, Raymond, you were talking about having more countries join this, but maybe all of you can take a stab at that. It's a big question.
Yeah, that's a big question. I suspect that it wouldn't happen without some sort of US leadership. It's a political risk, right? And it's completely understandable that if South Korea or Japan were to say, formalize their diplomatic relations with Taiwan, or like kind of quasi-formalize it in the same way as the TRA, you know the Chinese are going to be upset about it. I mean, you think about the THAAD deployment to South Korea, and I think it was shaved off 1% of South Korean GDP growth in that 1 year. That's a pretty big response, and this will be a much bigger thing. And so I think to some extent it does depend upon the U.S. to provide not just political cover, but also I think if the primary retaliation is going to be economic, then for the United States to provide some sort of alternative economic framework that can compensate other countries who want to pursue this. But it's a tough, difficult question.
It's a little bit. I think the relationship between Taiwan and South Korea after World War II was a very complicated one. You know, prior to 1992, they were often compared together. They were both on the front line of anti-communism. In fact, for the former government of Taiwan, the Nationalist Party, they actually, I mean, Chiang Kai-shek actually was, you know, part of the Allies, and you know that the liberation of Korea played a lot. So when the ROK established relations with PRC in 1992, it was a big blow. And in fact, that it was, you know, for many years, it was difficult to reconstruct the relationship between the two, although in many ways they should, you know, they are natural allies in many ways. But I think that, and you know, for the next 30 years, I will argue that South Korea has pursued a closer relationship with the PRC, economic markets, and maybe the concern about North Korea and so on, and not paying enough attention to Taiwan. And of course, South Korea, in your domestic politics, there's also the fundamental difference between the Conservative Party and the party on the left. And you know that the party on the left was pursuing a sunshine policy relationship with China and not paying too much attention to Taiwan. But now the Conservative Party, I understand that President Yoon is not very popular domestically, but his foreign policy is actually more in line with the kind of multi-party alliance that President Biden is actually constructing. So for example, South Korea very notably have stated more than one time that the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is of international concern. And so I think that there's room to grow, but I hope that this will become more stable in the Korean political system rather than vacillating between the conservative and the liberal factions of the government.
Brian?
Alan, I'll just add two quick thoughts to what my colleagues have already shared. The first is that it's worth reflecting upon why Taiwan has had so much success over the past period of time. Taiwan enjoys more international support today than it has at any point in its recent history. And I think that a big part of that is because President Tsai is perceived as being steady, principled, pragmatic. People trust and have confidence in her and her judgment and her consistency and approach. And so that is, I think, a key predicate for attracting international involvement and focus on and support for Taiwan. So that's the first thought. The second thought is that I think going from zero to a security discussion between Taipei and Seoul is a pretty hard path to take. And there are interim steps in between that could be pursued. In looking at areas where there are converging interests between Taipei and Seoul and using those as starting points for conversation would be what I would do if I was involved in those discussions. And, you know, issues around supply chain resilience, around the clean energy transition, around public health measures. These are areas where there are converging interests between Taipei and Seoul that may provide entry points for discussion about greater coordination. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, question up here.
I am Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I see the community in DC undergoing intense conniptions about whether there might be an invasion and when that invasion might be. And yet the bottom line is the only way to make sure Taiwan survives is to assume the invasion occurs sooner rather than later. Now, if your supply chain is broken and essentially doomed, And Taiwan cannot really reach out for anything coming by sea and only a little bit coming by air. You've got to move to the place where Taiwan is producing its own missiles, its own drones, its own marine drones, because the invasion fleet, something like 1,000 ships with 600,000 soldiers and Marines that have no brothers or sisters, is going to come perhaps without any warning. So how do we sit on Taiwan or help Taiwan massively reproduce its own weaponry, which is really essentially its own guarantee of stopping the invasion fleet?
All right, thank you. Another big question, military strategy. Who wants to?
Raymond first.
Okay,
Okay, sure,
Raymond.
sure. Although I don't want this to become a pattern. I mean, I think the good news is that Taiwan is doing that. It produces, I think, something in the order of, my numbers could be kind of off here, so don't quote me on this. I think they're producing the order of 200 anti-ship missiles a year. Now there are some issues with those missiles that I think the U.S. could help resolve. They are not road mobile, for example, and so that becomes a challenge. Taiwan is on track, I believe it's middle of this year, to produce 5,000 military drones. So there is indigenous production going on. It's not, I would say Taiwan's defense industrial base is not as well developed as, say, Japan or South Korea, but it is pretty well adept. Where Taiwan could really use some assistance, however, is on things like ramping up production on anti-air missiles and the kind of creating their own sort of IADS bubble. ISR, making sure that they have the intelligence to know where things are coming from, where and can they strike back. And then just overall societal resilience. I think the bigger issue for me is obviously defense industrial base, but on top of that, how long can Taiwan sustain itself? Now, it has some experience doing this, given the pandemic and just the kind of, just not having enough PPE going around, rationing that occurred as well. But when you're thinking of an invasion, I think one of the big issues is, one, what do you do with your critical infrastructure? Two, especially your energy supplies. How do you maintain that? Taiwan relies quite heavily on liquefied natural gas. As I understand it, I'm not a chemist, my dad was. LNG is corrosive, and so you can only hold it for like 2 weeks at best. That's not a lot of time, right? But if you were to stockpile it, doesn't that automatically become a target for any sort of for Chinese first strike? And on top of that, there's a sort of I don't know, political military question as well. If China sees Taiwan stockpiling, then that would make a presumable invasion harder. So should China go for an invasion earlier? Might the stockpiling itself be seen as a reason for China to increase its pressure upon Taiwan?
All right. Anybody else?
That's good.
Okay, all right, we'll stick with that. Yes, question in the back there? Gentleman over there in blue?
Hi, thank you. I can project, that's fine.
No, we're recording, so
Oh.
please do,
Hello? Thank you all for.
okay, well, if that's, could you identify yourself before you speak?
My name is Steve, I work and study here in the city. Thanks to the team for discussion. I actually came up in TV news as a young man, as a producer, so this sort of like his old home, a portable wireless. Thank you all for today's discussion. I appreciate it. To stick with the tributes to Dr. Kissinger, or maybe not tributes to Dr. Kissinger, he famously said that South America is a dagger pointed at the heart of Antarctica. To what degree is the AUKUS alliance a dagger pointed at the PRC? And to build on what the gentleman here said a moment ago, could you all examine the very pertinent question of cyber in any, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but in any invasion of Taiwan by the PRC? And thank you.
All right, so AUKUS, Australia, UK, US. Cyber.
Yes,
Yes, for good
I'll take the
measure.
first crack on AUKUS.
Okay.
I think AUKUS is pretty significant, just from the international relations standpoint. In the post-World War II era, the U.S. Is, of course, the main guardian and gatekeeper of the so-called non-proliferation regime. And people know that even among U.S. friends and allies, such as Japan, Korea, even Taiwan, they have tried nuclear programs, but the U.S. replaced that with sort of a either explicit or implicit nuclear umbrella. Now, so this begs a question: why Australia, sort of, which has assisted the U.S. in every war since the 19th century, is now being asked to take on this additional responsibility at the expense of the taboo against nuclear proliferation. I think most analysts will say is China. The U.S. wants to, especially under the Biden administration, want to enlist the help of like-minded and industrially capable allies, as many as possible. They think that the cost of sort of this nuclear taboo can be made up by this gain in getting another deputy in the Indo-Pacific. That's my interpretation.
Anybody else?
Well, I will venture a response to the question, which is that as I've been watching the debate in Washington, I've heard people say that the invasion was going to occur in 2023 after the Olympics because that was the period of maximum danger, H.R. McMaster. I've heard people say that it was going to occur in 2024, 2025, and 2027. 2026 is still open if anyone wants to claim it.
I'm sure somebody said that.
Maybe I missed 2026. My point is, it's getting ridiculous. If there is ever going to be an attack, and God forbid, I hope there never is, it's not going to be calendar-based. Xi Jinping does not have a calendar in his office with a date circled on it for an invasion of Taiwan. It's going to be conditions-based. And our job is to make sure that the conditions never allow for that outcome to occur. And AUKUS plays a role in that. Second observation that I will close with here is that I'm glad that you brought up cyber because we spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about a million-man swim across the Taiwan Strait, which in my mind is the lowest probability scenario. It's high risk, but extremely low in terms of probability. China would prefer to achieve its political goals at the lowest risk and cost possible. A war is the highest risk, highest cost scenario possible. That's not the plan. That's an option if all other options have failed. And I think that as a community, we owe it to ourselves to spend a little bit more time thinking about what those other scenarios are, what tools the Chinese would want to use to achieve their goals at the lowest cost and risk. And I think that cyber, gray zone activities like we've been talking about, this isn't a future hypothetical. This is an everyday reality. It's something that our friends in Taipei are dealing with on a daily basis. And the more that we can devote mind share and concentration around these real issues, I think the better we will all be in our goal of trying to uphold peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
All right. Yes, several questions. Now, Josh, I have to call on my former student.
Hi, my name is Josh. Went to GW for undergrad and currently doing my master's at Georgetown. I had a question. I agree with what I think there was consensus that the TRA is a floor and not a ceiling, but then that raises the question as to how far we want to push the ceiling. And I wanted to ask specifically about port visits or port calls and the US Navy making a port call to Taiwan. Is this something that makes sense or is feasible or something that the United States should push? And I'm pretty sure this is something that would be feasible under the TRA.
All right, naval question. Raymond, I'm sorry.
No, I think I'm the naval expert.
Okay, well, I'll take the first crack.
Yeah.
I think we need to, I agree with you that it is a floor and then we should push it toward the ceiling. And I think that most people will agree that if the ceiling is a little higher, we can breathe better, right? So I use that analogy. So what exactly is the space between the floor and the ceiling. And that is the positive agenda. I think there's still a lot, the US and Taiwan can do. We talked about a trade agreement, functional cooperation in pandemic, cyber area, the framework, the global cooperation and training framework, GCTF, on the State Department. But I want to distinguish between what is practical and what is symbolic. I think that the port calls by naval ships are actually allowed under Taiwan Travel Act. But then when one needs to ask the question, whether they actually contribute to strengthening Taiwan's defense or serve more to provoke China. So I think that's the kind of things that I'm trying to distinguish. So I think that the US and Taiwan can still do a lot to functionally, earlier the discussion about either authorizing Taiwan to produce domestically some munitions, weapons. I think that would be a very practical area of cooperation, and just do as much as you do, as much as possible, and without saying too much.
Thank you very much. There was a question right here in the middle. Just in the white outfit.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Jia. I'm currently working at Asia Society's Center for China Analysis. So thank you so much for this panel. It's very informative. And I think my question is try to follow up on the kind of Beijing's reaction to TRA, because I think we haven't touched much on that. So as we know, like China has frequently referred to the 3 communiques as the foundation for the cross-strait relations, like US policy. And at the same time, is discrediting the TRA as its like role in kind of determining US diplomacy to Taiwan. So I wonder, like, what is the kind of strategy that Washington is taking to bring TRA into the communication with Beijing in terms of cross-strait relations? Thank you.
I think that's a direct question for you, having dealt both with China and Taiwan in the NSC.
Well, I don't have any profound insight to offer. Unfortunately, the administration, I think its approach is to emphasize whenever we talk about our one China policy that it includes the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint US-China communiques, as well as the 6 assurances. And that the composite of these encompasses what is our one China policy. And Beijing doesn't like elements of that. 2 out of the 3 things they're not particularly fond of. That's okay. It's okay. There are plenty of things that that Beijing says and does that we don't like either. But that's just the nature of the relationship that exists between our 2 countries. And I think what's most important is not the order in which we recite these things or the explicit words, but the consistency and predictability that we have. The more direct and consistent we are in the way that we approach these questions, the easier it is for both sides to anticipate each other's actions. And when they have questions about the intentions of the other side's actions, to have an opportunity to ask directly, why did you do this? For what purpose? For what audience? With what goal? And the more that we're able to have the maturity to work through these issues, even when we don't like each other's answers, I think that it does contribute to stability.
Hey, thank you. I saw some other, yes, right behind that questioner right there. Can you raise your hand really high? It seems like I can't see. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ian. Hi. My name is Ian. I received the Sigur Center scholarship to study in Taiwan many, many years ago. I've heard, you've discussed economic investment agreements that could be strengthened to help Taiwan. But there's other aspects such as public diplomacy and diplomatic tools of statecraft that, for example, Taiwan only has a small number of countries now that recognize it. I'm wondering if there's a role for either helping them attain more friends overseas, as well as providing more moral and media support that could be written into a revised TRA. Thank you.
All right.
I remember after Panama shifted diplomatic recognition in 2017, Congress became alarmed. So there was this Taipei Act, right? And in fact, the U.S. State Department took a very unprecedented move of asking its ambassadors to 3 Central American countries with which Taiwan at that time had diplomatic ties back to Washington for consultation. And then in fact that the US also had become more vocal about the benefits of maintaining relationship with Taiwan. But then I think unfortunately, all these 3 countries later shifted diplomatic recognition to Beijing. So this shows that, you know, that there's a limit to what the U.S. Moral example can. And in fact, that they not surprisingly asked the question, you ask us to recognize Taiwan, why don't you? But of course, the US said that just because we cannot do that doesn't mean you should not do that. I think it's difficult. And you know that now Taiwan is down to 12 formal diplomatic allies. And in fact, in some regions, there's, you know, like only one, like one in Africa, one in South America. So these are all highly symbolic. And I think that this sense of sort of an alarm is, you know, being appreciated more than before. The US is doing this behind the scene, but then occasionally Secretary of State Antony Blinken will also say these are sovereign decisions by national governments and so on. So I think the more the US can back with real actions on its support of Taiwan, the more persuasion it will have.
Okay.
Chime in quickly on that? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. For me, I kind of go back and forth on this. I think it's a question of the utility of the allies or of having official diplomatic recognition. I think Ryan's absolutely correct that Taiwan's international support is probably higher than it's ever been. But I think on Taiwan's side, they would like some sort of concrete indication that that's the case. It's hard to say, yes, we know that these countries will line up with us in case of X, Y, and Z contingency when you don't actually have an official relationship with them. And I also think about Tanisha Fazal's book in 2005, 2007 about state death. And she finds that diplomatic recognition is probably the key variable for whether or not a country survives and or resurrects itself after a conquest attempt. And so insofar as she's correct, she lives down the street from me, I can go ask her, I guess. It's you know, that recognition can actually be quite important. But I think this also kind of draws in a broader question I have, in terms of the Biden administration's policy. You know, a lot of this stuff only matters if it's embedded within institutions and norms and social dynamics of, say, some sort of constructed liberal international order, some kind of order. Secondly, I think this goes back to your question, Jian. It's always kind of puzzled me, like when the Chinese government is saying, "Hey, look, the Tah-ray, what is that? We're all about the 3 communiques." I'm like, are you really trying to convince the United States that about its own policies? I don't quite get that. I'd love other kind of views on it because I just am not sure what's going on. I can see that sort of dynamic with UN General Assembly Resolution 2758. I'm like, okay, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to set the narrative here. You're trying to say our interpretation is the correct one, even though it's probably not the case. But to do that with U.S. policy, I don't know what they're doing. I'd love any sort of, don't mean to throw out a question, we can just skip this, but I'm like, anyone have any idea? Because I really don't.
Well, Raymond, we may have to ask them after.
No
We have
problem.
quite a few hands up, I see. And to the right, yes, we have to the right and the left. Okay, young woman over here, please, and then Michael. No, you first.
Okay,
Who's next?
so the 2 keyword I heard from this like great event
Just
is
identify yourself.
oh, my name is Kathy. I'm from Project 2049. Yeah, so like a two keyword from this great event is enduring and flexible. But what I'm thinking, I'm going to challenge this idea is not because there are two dynamics right now, is that US put a lot of short-term priorities, like two wars right now, and also the axis of upheaval, the synergy between the four countries. So there are a lot of dynamics and variables in maintaining the status quo. And the TRA is quite successful or maintain the status quo so far. But actually there are too much dynamic, and there are three definitions about status quo. So look forward to the next 45 years, what status quo does the US want to maintain? Like, what is their definition about status quo? Because there are a lot of dynamics and variables to define what is status quo is. And I think TRA is part of the reassurance to Taiwanese. And so if we are going to go to another upgraded, or if not upgraded TRA, how can they at the same time provide enough reassurance to Taiwan and at the same time maintain the new status quo defined by the US? That's my question.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to take that question? All right.
About 2 weeks ago, I delivered another paper at University of Nevada in Las Vegas. Yes, there are conferences in Las Vegas. It's a truth.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I actually, a portion of that actually deal with the status quo, this very same issue. I think status quo is one of the most interesting term of art in diplomacy. Ryan would probably agree with me that everybody talk about the status quo because nobody wants to be accused as a troublemaker or upset the status quo and so on. But everybody has a different definition of status quo. And the important thing is that, you know, a lot of times this different definitions of status quo, while a sort of apparent embracing of the status quo, allow the different parties to move on. Now, you ask, I already mentioned earlier in my presentation, the status quo is hardly static, so it's not unchanging. It's always changing. The biggest difference between 79 and the 2024 is that today, China is trying to change the status quo, okay? And this I can combine with that question about the Beijing's reaction toward TRA. I think that Beijing usually does not like to talk about TRA. Ryan is absolutely right, that doesn't exist. And when they are forced to say it, they will say it's negative, but they forgot the TRA actually constructed a status quo, which is also equivalent with Taiwan's diplomatic limbo. And this period of time coincided with China's era of economic strategic opening, that the last 30 years, they achieved unprecedented economic growth and to where it is today. So what is the status quo 30 years from now? I think former Assistant Secretary James Kelly said it all, maybe at this particular forum many years ago. He said, we tell the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, no unilateral change of status quo. And then when reporters, he said, to Taiwan, this means no declaration of independence. And to China, that means no use of force against Taiwan. Sorry. And then the journalist asked him, can you just explain what exactly is status quo? And then he said, the status quo as we defined it. Remember that quote?
Good. You had a quick.
Kathy, I'll just add one or two sentences, which is that this is an uncomfortable problem for many Americans because as Americans, we like to solve problems. When we see problems around the world, we have a spirit of problem solving. Taiwan is not an issue that is susceptible to solutions by the United States. And so it falls in a sort of a unique category of its own. But to try to answer your question, in my mind, if 45 years from now, we're here, I will be very old, but I will consider it a success if we have preserved peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, and that condition persists until such time as a resolution to the differences is available that is achieved peacefully and that enjoys the support of the Taiwan people. Taiwan people have democratic agency. They have the ability to exercise their views and register them. I think any resolution ultimately will require a constitutional amendment. A constitutional threshold in Taiwan is extraordinarily high. And so for there to be any resolution, it's going to have to enjoy tremendous public support within Taiwan in order to be durable.
Okay, thanks for your patience. Michael over here. And then I know there's several and we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to take a few questions together. And please direct it at anyone that you would like to.
I'm Mike Fonte. I'm the director of the DPP's mission here. This is for Ryan. Ryan, yesterday, Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink was on the Hill twice in different places. He was getting beaten up pretty badly by Jerry Connolly and others about strategic clarity. And they said to him, "How don't you follow the president? Don't you agree with the president?" And the Assistant Secretary said, "Yes, he's the commander in chief. We follow him for sure." But what Crittenbrink said is the TRA provides us with what we need to do to keep our policies forward. And I guess he also said that we don't use the term strategic ambiguity in the State Department. And I think that's really an important element, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how that works, because I think you've already said it here, which is the basic program, the basic policy is dual deterrence. No unprovoked action by China against Taiwan, no unilateral declaration of independence, but a peaceful, mutually acceptable resolution. But I was just wondering about that business about, we don't use that term in the State Department, right?
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'm going to take, let's see, we have nobody over here. One. There was somebody over there. Okay, I can't see the person behind but let's just take this gentleman. 1, 2.
Hello, everyone. I'm student in Ellis School. Ellis School in GW. Actually, TIA is a very successful act, but the situation is changed. 2024 is different 1997. So my question is, do you think we should amend TIA, specifically like Jinmen Mazu Island didn't include in TIA defense range. Second,
No, actually, could we just give it to one?
and
We're running out of time.
Biden said 4 times sent troop to defend Taiwan. This breaks the TIA. TIA only said we should strengthen defense equipment. So my question is, do you think we should repeal and amend TIA?
Okay. This gentleman over here, and please keep it short because.
Richard Coleman, a frequent visitor to Taiwan. I know that in a couple of weeks, William Lyon's going to be sworn in for the 3rd consecutive DPP presidency, which is unprecedented, and the Chinese are very upset about that. What was interesting, though, that there's people who think that the DPP would have lost, except for the entry of a 3rd party, which is the Taiwan People's Party, which got 26%, and especially a lot of young people. And one of the arguments of that campaign was, we'll prevent war. You know, we're not wed to either pole. We're not Kuomintang pro-China, and we're not DPP pro-US. We'll prevent war. So do you think there's actually some support for that, that culturally the people are feeling that they don't have to choose, just like the Taiwan Relations Act, we don't have to choose?
Okay, I don't think we have more time than that for the remaining number of minutes. So let me turn it to my panelists to take the question.
Just take a quick one. I don't think Taiwan Relations Act should be amended. I think that, as I said, it has proved to be very flexible and resilient. Yes, you're right that the Jinmen Mazu and several offshore islands were not included in the TRA because they were not included in its predecessor, the ROC USA Mutual Defense Treaty. Well, so that's a legal matter. As a practical matter, it will be interesting to see what the US action would be if one day China should use force to seize those islands, because that they matter to Taiwan, you know. So during the 1958 Jinmen crisis, the US provided logistical support, but not direct combat.
Okay, and Ryan, I think.
Michael, thanks for the question. Strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity are 2 terms that people in my new world, or the think tank world, spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about. They are terms that no one spends any time thinking about or talking about inside the United States government. Because these are sort of academic exercises. The reality is that when you're in government, you're charged with working as hard as you can to preserve peace and stability, to oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo, and to ensure and insist that any resolution to cross-strait differences be resolved peacefully. That is your mission. And the amount of bandwidth that's available to engage in those academic debates is left to people like me.
Yeah. And the question on the either or question by this gentleman was on the identity, I guess.
Having to choose
Having to choose between US and China.
the Taiwan People's Party. Well, okay, so I'm going to respond very quick. I'll get to your question in a second, but
We just have about 30 seconds.
okay.
though.
So, Mike, all I mention is that Biden voted on the TRA, so that's all he is. And so, in his mind, his interpretation of what the TRA actually means, well, that could conceivably be true. That he thinks of it as a security agreement. Sir, for you, I think the question is less Jiminamatsu. It's more, if for anybody still looking for a term paper, I would love you to write this because I don't have time to do it. Looking in the congressional record, the TRA is very word-wise similar to the panoply of agreements that the United States has in Asia. So Japan, South Korea, Philippines, CEDAW. The language is really similar. To what extent did Congress actually intend that? On your question, I personally think that the TPP is kind of palmotang, like it's a bubble party. Someone's like a 26%. The TPP did not get 26%, right? And so I think that's correct. He was pulling the rest of the party along, and just like with the Qinmingdang, the Xindang, all these sort of right-ish parties that kind of come up based on personality, but they don't. A friend of mine's friend in DoD said there are only two real parties in Taiwan. One is a DPP, the other is the CCP. And he meant that in a certain way, but I think it actually resonates in the sense that like the right parties are not effective parties. They are not modern mass parties in the way that we think about them in, say, political science. And I think that's really bad. Good democracies require a cohesive center-right party. And if we don't get that in Taiwan, or if Taiwan doesn't get that, it imposes what I think Aram Her calls like a democratic ceiling on how far Taiwan can progress as a democracy.
All right. Well, on that note, first of all, I wanted to say that obviously, even after 45 years, there's a lot to talk about the TRA. And I guess some of you will be back here in 45 years. Not us to keep talking about this. But I want to make a special thank you to the ambassador for joining us and giving us so generous time. And to my fantastic panelists for taking so many questions from so many different angles. And this ends our event for this is our last event, our Sigur Center event for the semester, for the year, actually. So what a way to end it. Thank you all for coming.